Welcome to Life Stories. What would you do if, the night before your wedding, you discovered that the person you loved saw you as nothing more than a stepping stone to wealth and power? Olivia had everything: love, trust, and a future she believed in, until a single overheard conversation shattered it all. But instead of breaking, she chose to fight back. This is a story of betrayal, justice, and ultimate redemption. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't destruction, it's rebuilding something stronger. Subscribe to Life Stories to begin today's journey. Let's dive in. They say that the night before your wedding is supposed to be magical. A time filled with butterflies, excitement, and an overwhelming sense of joy. I had imagined spending the evening reminiscing over the memories Daniel and I had built together, anticipating the life we were about to share. Instead, I found myself standing outside a private lounge at the Lexington Hotel, clutching a velvet box in my trembling hands, listening to the man I loved mock me as if I were nothing more than a business transaction. Daniel Carter, the man I had spent 3 years believing in, a man I had envisioned growing old with, raising children with, creating a life filled with love and trust. He was everything I thought I wanted: successful, charming, and from a family so well respected that even strangers spoke his name with admiration. His mother, Margaret, had taken me in as her own, filling the void left by my parents' passing. His sister, Rachel, had become the best friend I never had. Everything was perfect. Or so I had convinced myself. I hadn't intended to go to his bachelor party. The wedding was meticulously planned down to the finest detail, and I had spent the evening wrapping up last-minute preparations. But Margaret had asked me to deliver something: Daniel's grandfather's cufflinks, an heirloom meant to bring him luck. A simple request, one filled with sentimentality. And so, without hesitation, I made my way to the hotel where Daniel and his friends were celebrating. The staff knew me well. Daniel and I had hosted charity events here. Our engagement party had been held in the ballroom just months prior. When I arrived, they directed me to the lounge without question, smiling warmly as they escorted me toward the door that would soon change everything. At first, it was his laugh that caught my attention: deep, confident, familiar. I had heard that laugh 1,000 times before, yet something about it felt different that night. Then came the voice of his best friend, James. His words laced with amusement. "Come on, man. You can't be serious about settling down with Olivia." I should have walked away then. Should have left before the truth had a chance to destroy me. But I didn't. I stood frozen in place as Daniel's response, slurred slightly from the expensive whiskey he had been indulging in, cut through the air like a knife. "Why not? She's perfect on paper," he said, his voice void of warmth. "Her family's gone, which means no in-laws meddling in my business. Her trust fund will help expand Carter Industries. And she's got the kind of social connections that make life easier. Besides," he laughed again, a sound that now felt cruel, "she's completely devoted to me." Laughter erupted from his friends. But it was what he said next that turned my blood to ice. "She's just temporary anyway, until someone better comes along. Someone more suitable for the long term." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. The words echoed in my mind, twisting the last 3 years of my life into a lie I had been too blind to see. My mind raced through every moment, every late-night business call, every excuse, every time I had ignored the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. And suddenly, it all made sense. Yet, I didn't cry. I didn't storm into that lounge demanding answers. A strange calm settled over me, one that felt foreign and unnatural. My hands tightened around the box containing the cufflinks. But instead of delivering them, I turned on my heel and walked away. Back in our penthouse, I sat in silence for what felt like hours. The city lights flickered beyond the glass windows. Indifferent to the storm raging inside me, I could have left then, packed a bag, disappeared without explanation. But that wasn't enough. Daniel had reduced me to a convenience, a placeholder, a stepping stone for his ambitions. He had used my love as leverage, and in his arrogance, he had assumed I would never see the truth. But now I did. And I would make sure that when the morning came, he would see it too. I opened my laptop and began typing, my fingers moving with precision. As his business partner, I had access to everything: emails, financial records, client information. At first, I wasn't sure what I was looking for. But then, piece by piece, the truth began to unfold before me, revealing not just a man who had deceived me, but a man who had built his entire world on deception. 4 hours later, I had enough evidence to not only break his heart but to completely dismantle his carefully curated life. As the city drifted into dawn, I closed my laptop and exhaled slowly. Today was supposed to be my wedding day. Instead, it would be the day I walked into that church. Not as a bride, but as the woman who would make Daniel Carter fall to his knees. Not in devotion, but in devastation. Morning arrived with an eerie stillness, the kind that comes before a storm. I had always imagined waking up on my wedding day with butterflies in my stomach, overwhelmed with excitement, surrounded by the people I loved. Instead, I sat alone at the vanity in my bridal suite, watching my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at me was not the same one who had woken up yesterday, dreaming of a future with Daniel Carter. This woman was different. I moved methodically, applying my makeup with steady hands. No trembling, no hesitation. Every stroke of the brush, every sweep of color, felt like war paint. The wedding dress that had once symbolized a promise now felt like armor. The weight of the envelope hidden in a discreet pocket, sewn into the folds of satin and lace, reminded me of my purpose. There was a knock at the door. Margaret entered, her eyes shining with emotion. She carried my bouquet, white peonies and blush roses, the flowers Daniel and I had chosen together. The sight of her, so radiant, so full of hope, made my stomach tighten. She had no idea that within the next hour, everything she believed about her son would come crashing down. "Olivia, darling, you look breathtaking," she whispered, fastening a pearl necklace around my neck. "This has been in the Carter family for generations. I want you to have it. No matter what happens today." Her words carried an unintended weight. I swallowed the lump in my throat and smiled softly. "Thank you, Margaret. You've been like a mother to me." She touched my cheek, unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface, and left me alone once more. Minutes later, Rachel entered, adjusting my veil with delicate fingers. "I can't believe my brother got so lucky," she said, beaming. "You're going to take his breath away." If only she knew how right she was. The preparations continued in a blur. My bridesmaids fluttered around me, toasting with champagne, unaware that I couldn't bring myself to drink. Each notification on my phone made my pulse quicken, not from wedding jitters, but from anticipation. At 11:43 a.m., the final message arrived. Additional evidence secured. Reporter in position. SEC representatives notified. I exhaled slowly, my grip tightening around my phone. It was time. The ceremony was set to begin at noon. My bridesmaids lined up, their excitement palpable. As they stepped through the grand doors of St. Augustine Church, I lingered behind. I reached into the hidden fold of my dress and felt the envelope, thick with undeniable proof. I could hear the string quartet playing Pachelbel's Canon, the same piece Daniel and I had chosen on a rainy Sunday afternoon. Months ago, back when I still believed in the dream he had so carefully woven around me. A final message flashed on my screen. Reporter and photographer in place. Business partners all present. I deleted it, slipped my phone away. A wedding coordinator approached, glowing with professional cheer. "Ready, Miss Collins." I thought of Daniel, standing at the altar, his carefully curated mask still intact, I thought of every whispered promise, every touch, every stolen kiss that now felt like a lie. Then, I thought of his words from last night. She's just temporary anyway. Until someone better comes along. A slow, deliberate smile curved my lips. Yes, I said smoothly. I'm ready. The church doors swung open. 200 guests rose to their feet. At the end of the aisle, Daniel stood, tall and handsome in his tuxedo, wearing that same practiced, confident smile that had once melted my heart. He had no idea that in less than 5 minutes, that smile would shatter along with his reputation, his business, and the life he had so meticulously built on deception. Each step down the aisle was a countdown to destruction. And I had never felt more alive. The weight of the bouquet in my hands was nothing compared to the weight of the truth I carried. Each step I took down the aisle felt surreal, like I was moving through a slow-motion film, where every detail was magnified. The murmurs of admiration from the guests, the soft rustling of silk and lace, the flicker of candlelight reflecting off the towering stained-glass windows, it was all so perfect. So picturesque. Exactly as I had planned. But today was no wedding. As I neared the altar, Daniel's smile grew wider, full of the easy confidence of a man who believed he had one. He reached out for my hand, ready to play his part in the grand illusion of love and devotion. I stepped back. Just slightly. Just enough. A flicker of confusion crossed his face, his brows furrowing for the briefest moment before he masked it with another carefully practiced grin. The priest opened his mouth to begin the ceremony, but I raised a hand, stopping him. Before the first words of our vows could be spoken, I turned not toward Daniel, but toward the congregation. The hush that fell over the room was instant, thick with anticipation. 200 pairs of eyes locked onto me, waiting for an explanation. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. Then, with the same measured composure I had spent the night perfecting, I spoke. Before we begin, I said, my voice carrying through the grand cathedral, I'd like to share some readings. A soft ripple of confusion moved through the crowd. A few guests exchanged puzzled glances. Margaret's smile faltered slightly. Rachel tilted her head, uncertain. Daniel shifted beside me. Olivia, he said under his breath, his voice a warning. I ignored him. I reached into the folds of my dress, my fingers grazing the envelope hidden there. The moment I pulled it out, something in Daniel's expression changed. The color in his face drained just slightly, not enough for anyone else to notice. But I did. This isn't from the Bible, I continued, my tone smooth as silk. But from Daniel's private emails. A sharp intake of breath came from somewhere in the pews. The hush turned into murmurs. A nervous chuckle rippled through Daniel's groomsmen. But I wasn't finished. I broke the seal on the envelope, the sound of tearing paper loud in the silence. And then I began to read. My dearest Lauren, once the wedding secures the merger and Olivia's trust fund is accessible, we can proceed with our original plan. She suspects nothing. A gasp rang out from the crowd. The murmur turned into an eruption. Margaret's hands flew to her mouth. Rachel's eyes widened in horror. Daniel took a step forward, his face contorted with barely concealed panic. Olivia. But I raised my hand again, silencing him. There's more, I said, my voice sharper now. Would anyone like to hear about the offshore accounts? The diverted company funds? The embezzlement at Carter Industries? The weight of my words crushed the air out of the room. Daniel's mask shattered. He lunged for the papers. But I had anticipated that. I let them fall from my hands, the sheets scattering across the aisle like confetti, except instead of blessings. They were filled with evidence of his betrayal, his fraud, his lies. A commotion erupted as reporters, strategically placed among the guests, began snapping photos. The church doors swung open, revealing 2 suited agents from the SEC, their presence confirming everything I had just exposed. No. Daniel breathed, his voice raw with disbelief. You wouldn't. But I already had. The guests were no longer watching a wedding. They were witnessing the downfall of a man who had thought he could deceive the one person who had loved him most. Daniel Carter was no longer the groom. He was the accused. And I had just delivered his verdict. Chaos erupted inside the grand cathedral. The elegant whispers of admiration had turned into frantic murmurs, gasps, and the frantic clicking of cameras as journalists captured every second of Daniel Carter's downfall. The once carefully orchestrated wedding had unraveled into a spectacle. A front-row seat to the demise of a man who had built his empire on deception. Daniel's hands clenched into fists at his sides. His confident posture had crumbled. His face a mix of panic and anger. He took a step toward me, voice low and trembling with restrained fury. Olivia, he hissed through gritted teeth. We can fix this. Not here. Not like this. I took a step back, holding his gaze with unwavering steadiness. You already made your choice, Daniel, I said, my voice cool, deliberate. And now, I'm making mine. Margaret stood from the front pew, her usually composed face twisted with confusion and desperation. Daniel, she gasped, turning toward her son. Tell me this isn't true. Daniel turned, his hands raised as if he could somehow salvage the moment. Mom. But I wasn't finished. I stepped forward, my voice clear, cutting through the stunned silence. Margaret, I wish I could tell you that your son is the man you believed him to be. But last night, I overheard the truth from his own lips. Her expression collapsed. A mother watching the illusion of her perfect son crumble before her very eyes. Beside her, Rachel had gone pale, gripping the edge of the pew, eyes darting between me and Daniel, struggling to process the betrayal. A cough from the back of the church drew my attention. The SEC agents, dressed in crisp suits, stepped forward with calculated precision. One of them, a tall man with sharp features, addressed Daniel directly. Mr. Carter, he said, his voice all business. We have a few questions regarding your recent financial activities. We'd appreciate your cooperation. Daniel's face turned a sickly shade of gray. He turned to me, desperation creeping into his voice. You set me up, he whispered. You were never going to marry me. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to smile. A small, knowing curve of my lips. No, Daniel, I said softly. You were never going to marry me. His eyes flickered to the scattered documents. The evidence now laid bare for all to see. His mind was racing, searching for an escape, an excuse, an angle. But there was none. One of the agents stepped forward, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The sound of metal clicking sent a hush over the congregation. Mr. Carter, we need you to come with us. A stunned breath swept through the guests. Daniel stumbled back, shaking his head. No, this isn't happening. The reality had set in. He had lost. The world he had meticulously built. The reputation he had cultivated. The future he had so carefully planned, gone. All within minutes. Rachel broke the silence, her voice trembling as she whispered, "Oh my God. Olivia, you knew." I turned to her, and for the first time that day, my heart ached. Rachel had been nothing but kind to me, an unwavering sister figure in my life. She hadn't deserved this. Neither had Margaret. I'm sorry. I told them honestly. I truly am. But I wasn't sorry for exposing the truth. Daniel Carter had played his game, believing he could manipulate me, use me. But in his arrogance, he had underestimated one thing: my ability to walk away. As the agents led Daniel past me, his eyes burned with anger, regret, something that might have once been remorse. He leaned in as he passed, his voice barely above a whisper. I did love you. In my own way. I met his gaze, unflinching. Your way was never good enough. And with that, Daniel Carter, the man I had once thought I would spend forever with, was led out of the church in handcuffs. His perfect world collapsing behind him. I turned, lifted my chin, and walked back down the aisle, not as a bride, but as a woman finally free. The grand doors of St. Augustine Church swung shut behind me, sealing off the chaos inside. Outside, the crisp autumn air filled my lungs. Sharp and refreshing, a stark contrast to the suffocating tension I had left behind. The sky was a clear, pale blue, as if the universe itself had wiped the slate clean for me. A crowd had already formed beyond the church steps, journalists, photographers, curious onlookers drawn by the unfolding scandal. They swarmed like bees to honey, their cameras flashing, voices calling my name. Olivia. Can you confirm the allegations against Daniel Carter? Did you know about his fraud before today? Why expose him at the altar? I didn't stop. I didn't answer. I simply walked, one foot in front of the other, my veil trailing behind me like the ghost of the life I had left behind. Then, amidst the sea of voices, a familiar one called out, "Olivia." I turned, my breath catching slightly. Rachel. She stood at the edge of the steps, her champagne-colored bridesmaid dress now a cruel reminder of what this day was supposed to be. Her eyes, still wide with disbelief, searched mine for answers. "You knew," she said, her voice breaking. "You knew before today, didn't you?" I swallowed, my fingers tightening around the bouquet still clutched in my hands. "Yes," I admitted. "I knew last night." She shook her head, taking a hesitant step forward. "Then why didn't you tell me? Why let me stand there, believing in him, believing in all of this?" I exhaled slowly. "Because if I had told you in private, would you have believed me?" She opened her mouth, but no words came. The answer was clear. Rachel had idolized her brother. Daniel had always been the golden boy, the one who could do no wrong. If I had tried to warn her, she would have defended him, dismissed my concerns, convinced herself I had misunderstood. Now, standing here, watching the man she had trusted be led away in handcuffs, she couldn't deny the truth. Tears welled in her eyes. "I feel like I just lost my brother," she whispered. A pang of sympathy tugged at my chest. "Maybe," I said gently. "Or maybe you finally found out who he really was." Rachel's lips pressed together as she wiped at her face. For a long moment, she just stood there, processing. Then, slowly, she nodded. "You didn't deserve this," she said. "Neither did you." I thought. She hesitated before reaching out, squeezing my hand briefly before turning back toward the church. Toward Margaret, who, no doubt, was struggling with the weight of the truth herself. As I watched her go, my own legs suddenly felt heavy, the exhaustion creeping in. I needed to leave, to be anywhere but here. I turned to descend the steps, my mind already racing with what came next. I had expected this moment to feel triumphant, like the grand finale to a perfect act of justice. But instead, as I stepped into the waiting car and the driver pulled away, all I felt was weightless. Not empty, not broken, just free. For the first time in 3 years, I belonged to no one but myself. And that, I realized, was worth more than any wedding, any name, any carefully constructed life I had once dreamed of. Because now, I had something better, a fresh start, a blank slate, and the knowledge that sometimes, walking away isn't just an act of survival. It's an act of power. The night before my wedding had shattered my world. But in the ruins of that betrayal, I found something far greater than I had ever expected: freedom. In the months that followed, Daniel Carter became a cautionary tale in business and society alike. His fraud unraveled further, revealing a web of deceit so intricate that even those closest to him had been blind to it. His mother, Margaret, withdrew from public life, devastated by the truth. Rachel, however, refused to let her family name be defined by her brother's sins. She cut ties with Daniel and worked tirelessly to rebuild what he had destroyed, proving that legacy is not in the name we inherit, but in the choices we make. As for me, I moved on. Not just from Daniel, but from the person I had been when I loved him. I built a life of my own, one that didn't revolve around anyone else's ambitions. I started a consulting firm specializing in corporate ethics, using the very skills Daniel had tried to manipulate against me to ensure others wouldn't fall victim to the same deception. And somewhere along the way, I learned to love again, not in the reckless, all-consuming way I once had, but with someone who saw me as an equal, not a possession. A love built on truth, not illusion. Looking back, I don't regret what happened. If anything, I'm grateful. Because sometimes, the worst thing that ever happens to you is the exact thing that sets you free. If you enjoyed this story of resilience and justice, make sure to subscribe to Life Stories for more incredible real-life tales. See you in the next video.